Looks like we're diving deep into critical thinking and problem solving today.
Yeah, you've given us a pretty hefty document here.
It looks like some kind of like a guide almost, huh?
Oh, for sure. It's got like definitions and techniques, even case studies.
It's like they tried to pack everything they could into it.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what we pull out of this.
Well, I noticed right off the bat they talk about Stephen Covey's circles.
Oh, yeah. The circle of concern and the circle of influence.
Those are important concepts, right?
Absolutely foundational, I think.
So what do you think they're doing in there?
Well, I think, so much of problem solving, it comes down to focus, right?
Right.
And Covey's point with those circles, like, it's about recognizing that we spend way too much energy on things we can't actually control.
All the time. Like when your flight gets delayed,
Exactly. And you can sit there and stew about it, but it doesn't change a thing.
Nope. The plane's still going to arrive when it arrives.
You've just wasted all that energy on something completely outside your control.
That's the circle of concern, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff that we worry about but can't do anything about.
Exactly. Covey says the key to effectiveness is focusing on that other circle, the circle of influence.
The things we can actually impact.
Yeah, it doesn't mean ignoring the problems, but it's about being strategic with your energy.
So instead of just worrying, it's about asking, okay, what can I actually do about this?
That's a huge shift when it comes to problem solving.
It is. Now, the guide also gets into this whole debate about like critical versus creative thinking.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
It seems like they're often presented as like opposites, but
in reality, you need both for effective problem solving.
they're two sides of the same coin.
I like to think of it like critical thinking is the detective,
Examining the evidence, looking for clues.
Right. Connecting the dots, using logic to figure out what happened.
And then creative thinking is like the inventor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Coming up with those out-of-the-box solutions, those wild ideas.
It's like you need the detective to understand the problem.
And then you need the inventor to come up with the solutions.
Makes sense. Now, this guide also lays out a 5-step problem-solving process. Kind of reminds me of like the scientific method almost.
Oh yeah, it's very structured, methodical, and it starts with clearly defining the problem.
No jumping to conclusions. You got to really nail down what's going on.
Right, like let's say your website traffic suddenly drops.
Oh, that's a nightmare scenario for a lot of people.
But instead of panicking and assuming no one's interested anymore, you have to get specific.
Like, is it all pages or just certain ones?
When did it start?
What else might have changed around the same time?
You got to dig into the details.
That's where the guide suggests using something called the 5 whys technique.
Yes, that's a classic. Such a simple but powerful tool.
So break it down for me. How does that work?
You basically just keep asking why until you get to the root cause of the problem.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. I used this once with my team when we had a product launch that totally flopped.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, we were all set to celebrate, thought we had a winner on our hands.
Oh.
But sales were dismal, like no one was buying it.
Ouch.
So we started asking why. Why aren't people buying this?
Okay. Yeah.
First, why? It turned out the marketing message wasn't resonating. So why wasn't it resonating? Well, because it didn't accurately reflect the product's key features.
Okay. I see where this is going.
And why was that? Turns out the marketing team hadn't been properly briefed on those features.
So it was a communication breakdown, not a problem with the product itself.
Exactly. And we wouldn't have gotten there without asking why 5 times.
Wow, that's a great example of how the 5 whys can really get you to the heart of the matter.
It helps you avoid those blame games and identify the real issue.
So once you've nailed down the problem, what's the next step in this 5-step process?
That's when the creative juices start flowing. It's brainstorming time.
Let those ideas run wild.
Yeah. And the key here is quantity over quality, at least initially.
So even if an idea sounds crazy, just throw it out there.
No judgment at this stage. You never know where those wild ideas might lead.
I can see how that would take the pressure off and encourage people to think outside the box.
And then comes step 4, where we have to actually choose a solution from all those brainstormed ideas.
Right. Got to narrow it down somehow.
And this is where that critical thinking comes back into play.
You got to put your detective hat back on.
Exactly. The guide introduces a tool called the Ease and Effectiveness Matrix to help with this.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is that?
It's a grid with 4 quadrants. One axis is ease of implementation, the other is effectiveness.
So you plot your potential solutions on this grid.
Right. And ideally, you want something that's both easy to implement and D, highly effective.
The sweet spot, the win-win.
But in reality, you often have to make trade-offs.
Right. Sometimes the most impactful solutions are also the most difficult to implement.
Exactly. That's where the matrix helps you visualize those trade-offs and make a more strategic decision.
It's like weighing the pros and cons, but in a much more visual way.
Absolutely. Now, once you've chosen your solution, you need a plan to actually put it into action.
Right. Can't just leave it as a good idea. Got to make it happen.
That's step 5, implementation. And the guide emphasizes the importance of a solid action plan here.
So what are the key elements of this action plan?
Well, first you have to break down the solution into specific tasks.
Okay, like creating a to-do list.
Exactly. But it's not just any to-do list. You have to think about the order in which these tasks need to be completed.
So what needs to happen first? What depends on what?
Then you have to assign ownership for each task. Who's responsible for making sure it gets done?
Delegate.
And finally, and this is crucial, you have to set deadlines. When will each task be completed?
Deadlines are key. Otherwise, things just drift.
It keeps everyone accountable and on track.
I'm starting to see how this structured approach could really transform the way we tackle problems.
It's not just about finding the right answer, but about having a framework for thinking through the entire process.
From identifying the problem all the way to implementation.
Now, the guide also mentions that not all solutions are created equal. You have different types.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, it's not always about completely eliminating the problem.
Right. Sometimes a workaround is more practical.
Or a mitigation strategy.
Exactly. So they categorize solutions to different types, like corrective, adaptive, interim.
So corrective is the classic, fix the root cause.
Right. If the road is blocked, you remove the obstacle. Adaptive is more like finding a detour.
And interim, is that like a temporary fix?
Yeah, like a Band-Aid solution while you work on a more permanent fix.
Makes sense. What else do they have?
They talk about contingency plans, your backup plans if things go wrong.
Oh, that's important. Like having a plan B, just in case.
And then the holy grail of solutions, the preventive ones.
The ones that stop the problem from happening in the first place.
Those are the best, but not always possible.
True. But even if you can't prevent a problem entirely, it's good to think about how you might mitigate the risk.
Exactly. Now, we've talked about finding solutions, but how do we know if they're actually working?
Right. That's a crucial point. You can't just be set it and forget it.
Exactly. And that's where measurement comes in.
You've got to track the results.
What gets measured gets managed, right?
But how do you measure the effectiveness of a solution? It's not always simple.
You're right. There are some key steps. First, you have to define what success looks like.
Okay, so what are your specific goals? What outcomes are you hoping to achieve?
Then you have to figure out what data you're going to collect to track progress.
So if we're talking about that website traffic problem, we might track page views, bounce rates, time on site, that kind of thing.
Exactly. You choose metrics that align with your goals. And finally, you have to figure out how you're going to collect that data.
What tools or systems will you use?
So for the website, you might use analytics software.
It sounds like a lot of work, but I can see how this would make your problem-solving efforts so much more effective.
You're not just shooting in the dark. You have data to inform your decisions.
And it ties into that agile mindset we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Being willing to adapt based on the feedback you're getting.
Absolutely. The world is constantly changing. Problems rarely stay static.
So you got to be flexible, ready to adjust course.
Now, the guide also provides some case studies, real-world examples of how these principles play out.
Oh, I love case studies. They always make these concepts so much more concrete.
Let's start with the school funding dilemma. Imagine a school district facing budget cuts.
Ouch, that's a tough one. Happens all too often these days.
They have to decide whether to reduce funding for arts programs or sports programs.
Oh man, that's a lose-lose situation. Both programs are important.
Exactly. So how do they approach this problem?
Well, following those steps we talked about, I guess the first step is to really understand the impact of each program.
Right. They need data, not just on costs, but on the benefits of each program.
Like, how do these programs contribute to the student's overall development?
What are the long-term impacts?
And they'd probably want to gather input from all the stakeholders, right?
Absolutely. Teachers, parents, students, community members.
Get everyone's perspective.
And then comes the tough part, making a decision.
So did they end up cutting one program entirely?
That's what's interesting about this case study. They got creative. Instead of an either solution,
They found a third way.
yeah, they reduced funding for both programs slightly, but then created a summer camp that combined elements of both arts and sports.
Wow, that's clever. They preserved both programs in a new form.
And it exposed the students to a wider range of activities.
It's a win-win. Okay, what other case study do we have in our problem-solving toolbox?
Let's jump into the workplace ethics dilemma. This one's a bit thornier.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
This one involves a manager who discovers that an employee is submitting false expense reports.
Oh, that's a serious issue. What do they do?
Well, first, they had to confirm the facts. No jumping to conclusions.
Right. Got to gather the evidence.
And then they had to consider the ethical implications.
Because on the one hand, submitting false expense reports is a clear violation.
Right. But on the other hand, there might be underlying reasons for the employee's actions.
So it's not just black and white.
Exactly. So the manager decides to have a private conversation with the employee.
Give them a chance to explain.
And it turns out the employee was going through some serious personal difficulties.
Oh, wow. That changes things.
Right. So the manager is able to offer support and resources while still holding the employee accountable.
It's a compassionate approach, but it doesn't excuse the behavior.
Exactly. It's about finding a solution that addresses both the ethical violation and the underlying issue.
Okay, I'm liking these case studies. What else do you have?
Let's tackle a topic that's on everyone's minds these days. Plastic pollution.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. What's the case study about?
It's called the Environmental Policy Decision. It's about a city council trying to figure out how to reduce plastic waste.
I'm all ears. What options were they considering?
Well, they were debating two main approaches: banning single-use plastics outright,
Okay, that's one way to do it, make it illegal.
or implementing a really robust recycling program.
So two very different paths to the same goal.
And each option has its own set of pros and cons.
A ban would be more immediate, but it could also be disruptive.
And a recycling program is more gradual, but relies on people actually participating.
So what do they do?
They did their research, they looked at the data, they held town hall meetings,
Got the community involved.
and in the end, they decided to do a bit of both.
The classic compromise.
They phased in a ban on single-use plastics.
gave businesses time to adjust.
And they invested heavily in recycling infrastructure and education.
Smart. They acknowledged the complexity of the issue and found a solution that worked for everyone.
Now, before we dive into more case studies, I want to shift gears a bit and share some wisdom from some of history's greatest thinkers.
Oh, I love a good quote. Bring on the inspiration.
This one by Ralph Waldo Emerson always gets me thinking. Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail.
That's a good one. It speaks to innovation, forging your own path.
But it also connects to critical thinking. It's about questioning assumptions, challenging the status quo, exploring new possibilities.
Don't just accept the way things are, right?
Yeah.
Use your critical thinking skills to envision something better.
Exactly. Now, this next quote by Anatole France really gets to the heart of what it means to be an educated person. And education isn't how much you have committed to memory or even how much you know. It's being able to differentiate between what you do know and what you don't.
That's deep. It's about intellectual humility, recognizing that you don't have all the answers,
And being open to learning.
which is essential for problem solving, right? If you're too attached to your own ideas.
You might miss out on the best solution.
So true. Okay, give me another quote. I'm feeling inspired.
This one, by Robert Maynard Hutchins, emphasizes the importance of lifelong learning. The objective of education is to prepare the young to educate themselves throughout their lives.
I love that. It's not about cramming your head with facts, but about developing those learning skills,
The curiosity, the ability to adapt and learn new things.
which is more important than ever in today's world, right? Things are changing so fast.
Okay, one last quote for you to ponder. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
Ooh, that's a good one. It makes you think.
It reminds us that not everything can be neatly measured or quantified.
There's more to life than data.
Sometimes we have to trust our intuition or gut feeling.
Or consider those qualitative factors, the human element.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground already,
We have. This guide is packed with information.
but before we move on to the next section, I want to leave you with a challenge.
Ooh, a challenge. I like it.
Think about a problem you're facing in your own life right now. It could be anything, big or small, personal or professional.
Something that's been bugging you. Something you'd like to change.
Got it. Good.
Yeah.
Now, as we continue this conversation,
Keep that problem in mind.
and see how the concepts we're discussing apply to your situation.
Already has something in mind.
Perfect. Let's see how these problem-solving tools can help us tackle real-life challenges.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to dive in.
It's like that quote, right? Not everything that can be counted counts.
Yeah, that's a good one.
We can get so caught up in the data, the metrics,
But some things, they just resist measurement, you know?
the really important stuff sometimes, like
Like love or happiness or purpose.
You can't quantify those things.
Nope, you can't put a number on them. And I think that applies to problem solving too sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
It's easy to get fixated on the data,
The spreadsheets, the charts,
but you got to remember the human element.
the things that can't be easily
The
measured.
context, the emotions, all that stuff.
I worked for the company once. They were obsessed with data.
Oh, really?
I mean, they tracked everything,
Every click, every conversion.
but they lost sight of the customer.
They were so focused on the numbers, they forgot about the people.
Exactly. And it ended up hurting them.
How so?
Well, they had this big product launch.
Okay.
And they thought it was going to be a huge hit based on the data.
Oh.
But it flopped hard.
What went wrong?
They hadn't taken the time to really understand their customers' needs.
They were just looking at the numbers, not the people behind the numbers.
Right. And it cost them.
So what did they do?
Well, they finally realized they needed to change their approach.
They had to get out of the spreadsheets and talk to actual humans.
Exactly. They started doing focus groups, reading customer reviews.
They had to listen, really listen to what people were saying.
It was a tough lesson, but they learned it.
Sometimes you have to fail to really succeed, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes those failures are our best teachers. Now, speaking of learning from others.
You mentioned a quote earlier about entertaining a thought without accepting it.
Ah, yes. That was Aristotle.
He said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it."
Such a powerful idea and so relevant to critical thinking.
It's about being open-minded, right?
Being willing to consider different perspectives, even if you don't agree with them.
It's like you can learn something from everyone, even if you don't agree with everything they say.
And that's crucial in problem solving. You got to be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Yeah, if you're too stuck in your own ways, you might miss out on the best solution.
Remember, in the brainstorming phase, the goal is to generate as many ideas as possible.
No judgment, just ideas.
And then you can use that critical thinking to evaluate those ideas and choose the best one.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
It's all connected.
Critical thinking, problem solving. It's not just about skills, it's about a mindset,
A way of approaching the world with curiosity and humility.
a willingness to learn and grow.
Now, remember that challenge you were thinking about earlier?
Oh yeah, that problem I want to solve.
How could you apply some of these ideas to your situation?
I'm already thinking about it, actually. It's really helpful to have these tools and frameworks,
They give you a starting point.
a way to approach the problem strategically instead of just feeling overwhelmed.
Now, before we get too carried away with our own problems, I think we have one more case study to discuss.
Oh yeah, what's next on the agenda?
This one's about leadership and making tough decisions. It's called the CEO's dilemma.
Okay, lay it on me. I love these case studies.
Imagine you're the CEO of a company and you have to decide whether to close a factory.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
This factory has been around for decades,
It's probably a big employer in the town,
but it's losing money.
and it's dragging the whole company down.
So what do you do?
That's a real dilemma.
On the one hand, you have a responsibility to the company and its shareholders.
You got to make tough decisions sometimes.
But on the other hand, you have a responsibility to the employees and the community.
Those people depend on those jobs.
It's not just about numbers, it's about people's lives.
So what did the CEO do? How did they approach this problem?
Well, first, they gathered all the information.
Okay, got to understand
The
this.
situation, the financial data, the market trends, all of it.
And they probably talked to experts, consultants, people who could offer different perspectives.
Right. And they also made sure to engage with the employees and the community.
Kept them informed about what was going on.
Because even if the decision was ultimately out of their hands, they deserve to be heard.
Transparency is so important in situations like this.
It builds trust even when the news is bad.
So what happened? Did they close the factory?
They did. The analysis showed there was no way to make it profitable.
That's sad, but sometimes it's the only option.
But the CEO didn't just abandon the employees.
They didn't just wash their hands of the situation.
They worked with local agencies to provide job training and placement services.
They helped people find new jobs.
They also offered generous severance packages and extended healthcare benefits.
Wow, that's amazing. They really went above and beyond.
It's a good example of how, even in tough situations, you can still act with compassion.
You can make the best of a bad situation.
These case studies are really showing me that problem solving is about more than just finding the right answer.
It's about navigating complexity, considering all the factors,
Making decisions that align with your values.
and remembering that there's a human element to all of this.
Now, we've explored several case studies,
We've delved into some pretty deep philosophical concepts.
but before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you. the listener.
Right. The problem you're facing in your own life.
Think about everything we've discussed today.
The circle of influence, the 5 whys, those inspiring quotes.
How could you apply these tools and principles to your challenge?
What steps could you take to move closer to a solution?
What resources might you need?
Remember, it's okay to start small.
Even a tiny step in the right direction is progress.
What's one action you could take today to get started?
That's the question I want you to leave with.
Now, before our listener sets off on their problem-solving adventure, I think there's one more crucial topic we need to discuss. We've talked about, identifying the problem, brainstorming solutions, all that.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground.
But what about those times when you're stuck between options?
Yeah, that's the tough part.
You've narrowed it down, but you still don't know which way to go.
The agony of decision-making.
It's like standing at a fork in the road.
And both paths look promising.
But you can only take one.
And you can't help but wonder, what if I choose the wrong one?
Exactly. That's what keeps me up at night.
Well, I think a shift in mindset can be helpful here.
Okay. How so?
Instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty.
Which is impossible, really.
Exactly. What if we embraced it?
Embrace uncertainty. That sounds kind of scary.
It might feel counterintuitive, but hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Uncertainty is a part of life. It's a part of decision-making.
You can't ever know for sure what's going to happen.
Right. So instead of fighting it, we can learn to work with it.
Okay, but how do you actually do that?
Well, first, you have to acknowledge that you won't have all the answers.
Except that there are unknowns.
And that's okay. It doesn't mean you can't make a good decision.
So it's not about trying to predict the future with 100% accuracy.
Right. It's about making the best decision you can with the information you have.
And being open to adjusting course as you learn more.
Exactly. That's where that agile mindset comes in.
Being flexible, adaptable.
Willing to experiment, to iterate.
So it's not about making the perfect decision on the first try.
It's about making a decision and then learning from the results.
And using that feedback to improve.
Think of it as a continuous loop.
You make a decision, you take action, you observe the results, you learn, and then you adjust.
On repeat.
It's like instead of being afraid of making mistakes,
you view them as opportunities to learn and grow.
That's a really helpful way to look at it. I'm already feeling less anxious about decision making.
Good. And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
Right. There are people you can talk to, mentors, advisors.
People who can offer different perspectives.
Sometimes just talking through a problem with someone else can help you see things more clearly.
Absolutely. And don't forget to take breaks.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to step away for a while.
Let your subconscious mind work on it.
Come back with fresh eyes.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into critical thinking and problem solving,
It's been a journey.
I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, hit me with it.
Remember that quote by Derek Bach? If you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Powerful. It's a reminder that investing in our own learning is crucial.
Whether it's through formal education, reading, or just engaging in thoughtful conversations.
Like this one,
Exactly. Because in a world that's constantly changing,
where problems are becoming more and more complex.
the ability to think critically and solve problems is more important than ever.
It's not just a nice-to-have skill, it's essential.
So keep learning, keep growing, and never stop challenging yourself.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into critical thinking and problem solving. We hope you found it helpful.
And we encourage you to apply these tools and techniques to your own challenges.
Yeah.
Remember, you have the power to make a difference.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.